does technology have inherent risks? Can social sites contribute to anxiety and loneliness? Can it affect sleep patterns? Does it affect neurological development? Does it contribute to obesity? Does it affect behaviour? Should I give it to my kids? If so, how much? How often? Does it affect my ability to parent? And what proactive things can I do that can make a difference? My name is Tom Mansfield, and I'll be talking you through the next 3 weeks, exploring the answers to all of these questions. A little bit of background on myself. I have a degree in marketing and digital media and a diploma in television and film production, and I've been working in the industry for around about 10 years. I don't claim to be an expert, but I do have experience in the area, and I do understand how it operates and the tactics that marketers use and big business use to draw consumers into their products. And maybe you, like myself, have noticed how technology has become a part of our everyday lives. That there may be some of these, might have been some of the questions, that's all right, but maybe some of these questions are some of the things that brought you here this evening. Maybe you, like myself, have been thinking about some of these, maybe subconsciously, and you've been thinking, well, yes, I do notice that things have been changing, even in my personal life and with the lives of people around me over the last 12 to 15 years. And I felt this within myself, in how I was living, the things I was doing, the social behaviour I had, and the time that I was spending on smart devices. But I had no idea if this was normal or not. And briefly searching on the internet, I struggled to find anything meaningful that would answer the questions I have behind me. So I decided to do a thorough analysis of the landscape so I could answer these questions for myself. And as I was conducting this research, I thought it was such a relevant message for everyone that I wanted to share it with as many people as I could. And that's why we're here this evening. Because I was sure that it wasn't just myself that was thinking about these things or wanted these questions answered. Now, I spoke to a lot of different people who kind of knew that technology was bad in high doses, but no one really knows how much is too much, what is excessive usage, etc., or what the repercussions were. So my strategy was to compile an evidence-based list of credible research studies that showed beyond reasonable doubt the answers to these questions. So the material that I'll be presenting to you over the next 3 weeks is really not my own. It's a combination of over 32 research studies and snippets of over 100 research articles which I've read over the past year. And the studies range from child behaviour problems, sleep deprivation, obesity, parenting stress, neurological changes, digital dementia, psychology, academic performance, and the list could go on. And the demographic ranges from infants to adults in their test subjects. So it's a fairly broad group of people and range of topics. Now, I'll admit, I wasn't surprised with the findings, nor do I think you will be either. I think most of it we kind of already know and feel within ourselves, but it's just that no one really has the evidence or knows where to find the evidence to support those feelings. And no one really wants to know the truth about technology, because no one really wants to change the way they live or parent. I reckon that's another big reason. But why? Because for everyone, technology has become seemingly a necessity in this life, and for parents, an effective tool of managing family life every day. So these talks are in no way a judgment on parenting styles or life choices at all. I'm simply going to reveal to you evidence from research conducted that answers the questions that we listed before. They are designed to inform us as parents, adults and teenagers of the evidence of what technology actually does, so that we can then take that information and then apply it appropriately in our personal or family lives. Another thing to note is that there is way too much information out there. There is so much fascinating research we could talk about, but we simply don't have the time. But I'm sure you'll also have questions that I won't be answering on any of these nights, and that's why I'm in the process of making a booklet that I'll give to you on the third night, which will be a compilation of all the slides plus all the research material that I couldn't fit into my talks, and you can take that away and read it in your own time. Now, of course, another very important part of all these studies is what God expects of us and how we should live, and the wisdom we can gain from listening to Him and applying that to what we know about technology. Now, as we will see, the effects can be further reaching than we can think. And what we might see as being a seemingly harmless habit today for parents and children do have repercussions later in life. So the three talks that we've prepared for you are the consumer experience, which is this evening, wired children, and smartphones, dumb people. So tonight we're going to be understanding how technology and our adoption of it has changed over the past 10 to 15 years, and what that means for a Christian believer. Next week, we're going to be looking at children aged 18 and below, focusing on how technology is linked to behavioural problems, psychological issues, neurological changes, and a bunch of other things. It's going to be really interesting. Also, as teenagers, how does God want me to live? And as parents, how do we nurture our children through that important phase in their life? And in our last study, we're going to focus on those aged 19 and above, young adults and parents, examining how technology is affecting our relationships with each other, our social situations, life enjoyment, parenting stress, feelings of loneliness, concentration problems at work or at home, and digital dementia. Now, God has entrusted those who are older to teach in example and word God's ways to those that are younger, and by extension, everybody around. We're going to touch on techniques on how to begin to break free from overusing technology and how we can set up good habits around this. These talks are not about completely removing technology from our lives. Technology is here to stay and continuing to grow. But it's more about managing it instead of being managed by it. Now, I want to start with a challenge. Now, for the purposes of these sessions, we'll be focusing on technology in relation to what we can access through screens and smart devices, as there are obviously many more benefits that sit outside this, such as medical advancements, car safety, science, space exploration, energy efficiency. They're all amazing things, and the list could go on, but that's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on benefits in relation to what we can access through screens and smart devices. And I believe it's summarised in the following: communication, access to information, and organisation. Communication with people has never been easier or more accessible. You can, at the touch of a button, get in touch with anyone, anywhere on the planet. It's amazing. It's like no other time in history. Communication apps, everyone has about 6 or 7 of them on their phone. And the expectation of being able to be communicated to whenever you are, wherever you are, and whatever time is higher than ever. WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat, and thousands of other apps help us keep in touch with people that we never see, or that give us regular opportunities to reach out to people if they're struggling. Access to information like documents in cloud storage, answers to questions like how to build something or how to chop the perfect onion, or news, access to money through internet banking or mobile banking, Bible reading apps, general knowledge, or just navigating around using Google Maps. Another huge benefit that's come through our devices. And organisation of life in general, of work, of projects and events, etc. I think they're probably the 3 main ones. If you've got others, we can discuss it afterwards. But I think generally that sort of encompasses the major benefits that come from what we can access through our screens. Now, there is no doubt that there are benefits that have come with the advancements of technology, as we've just mentioned before. But Technology has advanced, and so then has our uptake and adoption in our everyday lives. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I remember when I was a kid listening to the radio and waiting for a song to come on and clicking record and making an awesome mixtape of songs. And I remember when the Discman came out with skip protection. I remember when Dad came home from work with that phone and it was just the bee's knees. I remember writing a letter to my friend Steve in Sydney and posting it. I remember when I went to high school, first and second year, they asked for floppy disks to be brought. I remember my mum for years used a paper diary to do all of her work. I remember when the internet was first launched. That's actually Apple's website, the first website they made back in 1996. It's absolutely hideous. I remember when email first came out and people that had too much time on their hands would send around a whole bunch of funny videos and it was great. I remember when I used to go to the shops with Mum and buy things, and I remember when I went around America when I was 6 and Dad lugged around a big VHS camcorder and we had our Olympus camera. Imagine doing that these days. I remember going to the library to research things for a project. I remember having exactly that, a Game Boy Pocket. Amazing if you've never used one. I remember when I got my first car and I used a Melways to get around, and I remember reading the Trading Post to look for cars because that's a passion of mine, and going to the cinemas quite regularly. But now all of these things have a digital replacement, don't they? Every single one of them has a digital replacement, and there are so many more that we could mention, but they are now all accessible through a single, powerful, fast, light, affordable, portable device. And we carry this around with us everywhere we go. Now, the amalgamation of technology has a direct correlation with the amount we use it. It must, which is represented by the amount of time that people spend on their devices these days as opposed to 15 years ago. Now, the benefits of technology aren't dissimilar to the benefits of automobiles. Like, there are amazing opportunities that have been opened up as the result of the invention of the car. Our lives and societies would not be the same without them. But driving a car comes with inherent risks, doesn't it? We could have an accident any time, and it might not even be our fault. And technology, I don't see as being any different. So, the benefits of technology, what have they brought? Well, we saw how it's roughly, with what we can access through screens, summarised into communication, access to information, and organisation. And we've seen how it's a huge benefit to not have to lug around the VHS camcorder and all those things that we can all access through the touch of a few buttons, well, no buttons on this one, and you can access whatever you want. So, how do we use devices today? What does the future of web and technology hold? When will we get there? Pause, dramatic effect. When will we get there? Well, focusing on the web, just as an example, the web, it provides us with the answer to those questions. So here is a graph. It's a beautiful graph. And what this basically shows us is the evolution of the web from the 80s through to what's predicted in 2030. Now, all the words on the top of that dotted line, which you are all very well aware of, are all the different web languages that have been created along that period of time. And all the words underneath are everything, all the functions for the web that have been invented as a result of those languages. So this table here shows pretty much the same sort of thing. Now, we'll just quickly go through this table. So in Web 1.0, so when it was first launched out to everyone, I'm sure we all can remember that, it was absolutely horrible. We couldn't do anything. It was just a read-only interface, wasn't it? It was just company profiles, things like that. It was really useless. And it was just a time waster, really, and it literally was a waste of time because you're not finding anything relevant or interesting on Web 1.0. And when Web 2.0 came out from 2000s to 2010, it was now the socialisation of information, because people could not only read content, but they could write content onto the web, or in other words, they could post content. This is where big social media giants like Facebook started to emerge, and that's where you could, where social gatherings started to be replaced a little bit by what you could do socially online. Now, we're currently in Web 3.0, which is between 2010 and 2020, and I'm sure you've noticed this over the last 5 to 9 years or whatever, where machine learning and artificial intelligence has really changed your web experience. See, back in this era here, there was a lot of data mining that was going on. So Facebook and all these companies, they knew sort of what to do, but it was a very manual process to target their consumers. But when machine learning and artificial intelligence really started ramping up between 2010 and 2020, all of a sudden they could use all of that data and they could target you exactly the way they wanted to. And a good example of that is when you might be on your email, you go, hey, Steve, let's go camping this weekend, and then all of a sudden there's just camping ads everywhere across your interface. They're called repositioning ads, and that's an algorithm that's used by Google, and it sends its message out to all these different sites that it has those things hosted on. So machine learning has just helped to automate things so that they can target us so effectively. Now, where's it going? Where's Web 4.0 going? Now, phone to a dentist. I've got a problem with my tooth. I make an appointment over the phone. Now, I don't have to do anything. Like, the phone has heard what I've said, and it makes an appointment in my diary. I don't have to enter that myself. Great. So it's auto-entered into my diary. In the morning of the appointment, I go to the pantry, I open it up, I pull out some cereal, and I start to eat it. Now, my Google Home, which knows what's in my pantry and can see what I'm doing in the kitchen, knows that I'm eating that cereal, and based on my spending algorithms, it knows that I'm due to purchase that cereal again because I'm running out with a bunch of other things, and it goes and orders that online for me. Now I'm done with my cereal, I jump into my car, and I don't have to do anything because I've got a driverless car. And it just takes me there because it's synced with my calendar, so it knows where to go. I don't have to say anything. So it just takes me to my dentist appointment and back again, and there are my groceries on the front door. Now, we already have quite a lot of those things already, don't we? We've got driverless cars, we have those Google Homes, but the technology is just sort of, nothing's really syncing with each other yet. But there will come a time where it will be an autonomous environment where technology and our lives are seamlessly integrated. Now, I think this is a concern for Christians because in the parable of the sower, God says that as the farmer was sowing seed and scattering it across the ground, it said some fell on good ground, and some fell on harder ground, and some fell on stony ground, and others, which fell among thorns, are they which when they sprang up, they went forth and are choked with the cares and the riches and the pleasures of this life, and bring no fruit into perfection. Now, we don't even have to guess what this parable is about. Jesus tells us. He says cares, riches, and pleasures. In other words, everything that the world values and tells you you need more of. That's what it is. And I don't know about you, but it's becoming harder and harder to make a clear line between with what the world values and with what God values. And from what we can expect to see, it's not necessarily going to get any easier when technology and our lives are seamlessly integrated. So how many people own smart devices? Well, according to this study, which is from the Pew Research Centre, 81% of Australians own a smart device. So children today are growing up in a very different world than even I grew up in, let alone 50 years ago. And they're also spending their time differently as a result. So a study conducted in 2018, published in the Preventative Medicines Report, sampled over 40,000 children, to ascertain whether screen time was linked to lower physiological well-being among children. One extract from that study, which is this one, one extract from that study focused on the average number of hours per day spent on devices in correlation to age. And this is what they found. So we've got age down the bottom, left to right, and we've got number of hours in screen time, top to bottom. And you can see, the older that they get, naturally the more screen time they start to consume. So that's what they, one of the things they found. Now, when they say screen time, they're not talking about at school, the school has given them a laptop and they're using that laptop at school. It's saying screen time during leisure time. So this is free time that they've got. They can do whatever they want, but they choose to use a screen. That's what it's talking about. And it says this in that second quote: the largest increase in screen time occurred between elementary school and middle school. By high school, ages 14 to 17, adolescents spent 4 hours and 35 minutes a day with screens. So the largest increase in screen time is right in the middle of the most influential part in our children's lives. Now, if we are trying to bring up a family with good morals, with good values, with good principles, spiritual or otherwise, the time we spend guiding our kids through this difficult period of their life will pay dividends now and later on. More on that in our next study when we focus on kids. Another research study conducted by Deloitte every year here in Australia for the past 7 years, entitled Media Consumption Survey, reviews how Australians are spending their screen time. It breaks it up into 5 main demographics. You've got the trailing millennials, the leading millennials, the X's, boomers and maturers. Now, this is how each of those demographics spend their time, and it's all slightly different. We can see there that down the bottom here are the demographics, and the colours represent the different things that they're doing with their time. And we can see that the leading millennials, which is the dark, the 27 here, this is the leading millennials, this whole column. We can see they watch a lot more streaming video than the matures do. So we can, that's the way that it's sort of broken up. But this is one of the things that they say. The way we are spreading our time across digital entertainment reflects the convergence of these activities. Consumers don't need to visit specific platforms, apps or websites to engage in a particular activity. Now, what they mean by that are that these core activities here are available in a single channel such as Facebook. So on Facebook, I can consume video, social media and browse random information. And the creators of these platforms understand and know that in order to keep all of us entertained on their platforms, they need to stimulate our brain in different ways. And one of the ways that they choose to do that is by letting us engage with different digital mediums on their platforms. Now, more on this a little bit later. Another really interesting thing is telcotainment. This is one of the extracts from the same research article. It says, meanwhile, there are some new norms in our consumption behaviour. Telcotainment is on the rise. With 21% of video and music streaming service subscribers now receiving their subscriptions through a bundled internet or mobile plan. So when they're talking about telcotainment, they're actually talking about accessing Spotify, Stan and Netflix through telecommunication plans on your phones, such as Telstra or Optus or Vodafone. That's what it means by telcotainment. So the reason why this has become so popular is because data is so cheap today compared to it was when the iPhone first launched. When the iPhone first came out, a few years later, I got one. And I had 500 megabytes per month on a $120 a month plan back in 2011. And one time I went over my data limit by 700 megabytes. Have a guess how much that cost me. It was $1 a megabyte. So it's $700. But these days, look at this. I just grabbed this off Optus's website. The standard plan these days is 50 gigs. 50 gigs a month. You pay a little bit extra, and who wouldn't? 200 gigs. But the amazing thing is that people are still getting through it and going over their data. On the same vein of streaming video on demand is this. Now we can see in this graph, we've got all the demographics down the bottom, and we've got the years in the colour. And we can see there across every single demographic, everyone is interested in streaming video on demand services. Everyone is affected by it, which I don't know, I find really interesting. So amongst every demographic, in the next slide, let's just talk about social media now. So what are our social media behaviours? We can see in this first graph here, again, we've got our demographics down the bottom and the number of years in the colours. We can see that in 2016, every single demographic roughly decided that Facebook and social media and all of those things were just not that great anymore. And the popularity of them started to diminish. But the study is very quick to say, in the first citation, that's not to say social media is not popular. 85% of respondents and 95% of millennials are active on some form of social media. In the second quote, this is really interesting. It says, this year there is a sharp decline in the percentage of respondents who feel time spent interacting with friends on social media is just as valuable as time spent in person. So that's a really insightful quote, and we're going to just try and park that in the back of your mind, that people are now starting to realise around 2016 that my friends on Facebook and all of that social interaction I have online is actually not as meaningful as real physical relationships, and we are actually going to talk about that later on. So what social platforms do people use? There's Twitter at 11%, Snapchat at 14%, Instagram 24%, YouTube 44%, and the big dog on top of the pile, of course, is Facebook at 77%. So, does anyone remember when Facebook actually launched? It was 2004, only 15 years ago. And a heap of other social networking sites have joined the online social revolution. Now, addiction is usually associated with drinking, gambling and smoking. And there's usually a negative connotation associated with that because they're generally recognised as things that tear individuals, families or society apart. So there is a general negative connotation associated with those things. But these sites, these social platforms are actually doing exactly the same thing. It is the same chemical that is released in our brain, which is called dopamine. Now, a really interesting quote from a man called Simon Sinek, who is a British author, speaker and organisational consult on millennials. He says this: technology, we know, it releases dopamines. It feels good when we get a response and when we get likes and new friends. It's why we keep going back. Dopamine is the same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, drink or gamble. In other words, it's highly addictive. We have age restrictions on smoking and drinking, but we have and gambling, but not on social media, which is the equivalent to opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, if this adolescent thing gets you down, you know, go for it. It's a numbing experience. So that's what he had to say on this. Now, social media companies use very similar tactics to the slot machine. You might think that's a bit crazy, but we'll run through a few examples of it in a moment. But they use very similar tactics to the slot machine. To make their platforms, as addictive as possible. Why? To maximise profits from its users. Tristan Harris, a former design ethicist at Google, he said this in relation to why social platforms are highly addictive. We cannot know when we will be rewarded, and more often than not, we don't find anything interesting or gratifying, much like gambling. But that's precisely why we keep going back. Dr. Mark Griffiths, a professor of behavioural addiction, he says this: the rewards are what psychologists refer to as variable reinforcement schedules, and is the key to social media users repeatedly checking their screens. Social media sites are chock-a-block with unpredictable rewards. They are trying to grab users' attention to make social media users create a routine and habitually check their screens. So using these platforms is effectively like having a slot machine in our pocket that we're playing 24/7 and we're receiving that same addictive rush. Now, the feeling of anxiety and stress of waiting for your horse to win, and you're just watching your horse and you put money on it and you're just absolutely battling, you want that horse to win, is actually, believe it or not, the same chemical reaction in your brain for when someone posts something and they're just waiting for someone to like it or to put a comment on it. That's the same thing that's being released in our brain. Now, likewise, it's exactly the same when the horse doesn't win and we don't receive the comments or likes on our post that we thought it was a good post, we thought we'd get at least 50 comments, and we get none. We're just devastated. And it's the same devastating feeling that we get when something doesn't go right, when we gamble. It's the same chemical reaction in our brain that is being released. Now, Sean Parker, who was a Facebook ex-president, he said this: the site was deliberately designed to exploit human vulnerability. It's no wonder that social media took the world by storm the way it did. These companies designed their platforms in ways that deliberately exploited the way our brains work. But who would have known? It's so easy to access. It's just Facebook. It's just social networking online. It's so easy to get an account or post something. And it's been very subtle, the way that it's grabbed the entire world's attention. Now everyone uses it. And the Bible warns us about this kind of subtlety. In Corinthians, it says, "But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." The things that hurt us or impact us negatively very rarely have the consequences obvious and upfront in your face right at the beginning. We'd notice that if that was the case. And for Eve, she was told by the serpent, eat the tree. Eat it. What's wrong with that? You're going to be wise like the angels. You're not going to die. Think about all the amazing things you could do. And all of a sudden, that very simple commandment that God gave her, don't eat the tree, was all of a sudden just not that simple anymore. And what once was so clear is all of a sudden not that clear anymore. And this quote warns us about that as well. What the world can do to the simplicity that we have all found in Jesus, that we have all found in him. And spending unnecessary amounts of time on these platforms may change the way that we see something to be so simple into something that's not so simple all of a sudden. Maybe that's what will happen. It's not that clear. So, does technology have inherent risks? We've just explored how our usage has increased dramatically. As a result, face-to-face communication has decreased. Social platforms and the likes use addictive gambling techniques to hook you on their platforms, and the Bible warns us that this whole process can be very, very subtle. So let's just talk about anxiety and loneliness just for a moment. Now, social media platforms are full of useless images like this, where people feel the need to post even the most mundane, boring things in their life to everyone around, and because everyone's going to find it amazing. The way that this person's constructed it, it's not even the full plate, it's half the plate. That'd be crazy putting the full plate on there. And they put this little filter on it and they post it up and go, hey, check out the muffins that I've made, it's amazing. But really, it's never the actual picture of what is happening in that person's life. I would describe that as my house. It's chaos, right? But this person doesn't want everyone knowing the bigger picture. Likewise with something like this, I'm working from home, I'm on my bed, I've got my little globe there, which I use all the time and find really, really useful. And I've got my pine cones, which are just sitting right here, which just happened to be there, I didn't put them there. And I'm just comfortable, and I'm just working from home, sort of, flexible working arrangements, and really, there's actually 6 cats in that room, but no one wants to show the bigger picture, do they? People are so selective about what they post. It's never the wider picture. It's never real life. Instead, it's always a moderated, sepia tone, filtered, cropped version of it. Now, I actually know someone who, when posting a photo of their newborn baby, photoshopped out all the little red dimples that can sometimes happen on their face, because their online profile, their online story that they want everyone to see and know that that's what their real life is, has a baby with perfect skin. Isn't that interesting? It's just a small example of someone doing that. But everyone thinks they need to show people even the most mundane of things. A study conducted in 2012 in Australia entitled "The Effects of Personality Traits, Self-Esteem, Loneliness and Narcissism on Facebook Use Among University Students" had this to say: impression management is attempts to control information in order to affect other people's opinions of oneself. Impression management on Facebook tends to be done implicitly by having certain friends belonging to certain groups, uploading selected pictures, removing tags from others, and checking in at certain places and locations. So this study is in relation to Facebook, but the same can apply to every single social platform, and it goes on to talk about this. Students who are high in loneliness use the site to compensate for their lack of real friends, their physical friends. Interestingly, students with higher levels of loneliness reported having more Facebook friends. Facebook users are more extroverted, less conscientious than non-Facebook users, and are reported to have higher levels of narcissism. So this is a few of the things that they brought out of this study. Now, we've already seen, if you remember, just cast your mind back just a few minutes, back to the Deloitte study that we were talking about, that showed how people are beginning to realise that relationships online are not the same or as meaningful as physical ones, which correlates perfectly with this study here, which reports increased feelings of loneliness and isolation among people who use social media platforms a lot. And it's a vicious cycle, unfortunately, where people who don't feel like they can connect physically with people compensate and go onto social platforms. They gather all these friends, but the downward spiral is, over time, they realise these friends are nowhere near as meaningful as having someone physical. So they get more friends online, and the vicious cycle continues. And people can go into pretty severe depression. But the Bible says this about anxiety: do not be anxious. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Jesus Christ. We know that there is an anxiousness that comes with constant use of social sites. Maybe you have felt this within yourself. What is posted on those platforms for many people is a filtered view of reality. which makes other people ask, well, why isn't my life like that? And the Bible gives us clear advice on how to live day to day. It says, don't be anxious about anything, but put your effort and your trust and your frame of mind higher. Put it into God. Put it into Jesus. It gives us that advice. And what's the result? It says you will feel peace. Peace in your life. I reckon if you ask anyone, that would be a highly desired thing that they would want. No one's going to say, I don't want peace in my life. That'd be ridiculous. The alternative is mayhem. And who wants that? Everyone wants to feel peace. And God says the answer is in Jesus. So, can social sites contribute to anxiety and loneliness? Now, we only just touched on that, much more in the next study. But yes, we did see in a very short period of time that, what's posted online is not real, necessarily. That these platforms are a place where people go to make friends because they don't feel like they can make real-life friends, but that these friendships are far less meaningful than physical ones. And we've seen how God tells us so simply, and usually the advice that God gives us is so simple: don't be anxious about anything. Trust in me, and I will give you peace. Who remembers this? I actually watched the video when he unveiled it. It's amazing. It's unreal. But I don't know that he had any idea how much that new invention was going to change the entire world. How long has the iPhone been around for? Does anyone want to have a wild guess?
16 years.
Less. 12 years. 2007 is when that day was. Thank you so much, Ethan. 12 years. And look at the phones that we've got today. 12 years ago. Now, in this slide, it shows us that there are 26.66 billion Internet of Things devices this year. And by 2025, it's expected to reach 75 billion. Now, Internet of Things just means devices that can connect to the internet, whether that's a watch, a Fitbit, computer, a laptop, tablet, whatever. So, right now, if we average that across the world's population, that's around 4 devices per person, which doesn't surprise me. I got 3 up here, right? I got 1 for a stopwatch, 1 for my notes, and 1 here, and I was going to bring another one. I thought, that's stupid. But you can see there that I've got 3, and I'm pretty conscious about how I use my stuff. But we know that advanced economies use or uptake smart devices much greater per person than emerging economies. And we can see that here by this lovely graph. We've got all the advanced economies, and the orange bit is who own a smartphone. And we can see down here, far less in the emerging economies. So really, amongst Western society, we have on average about 6 or 7 per person. And if you just think back to your house and what you use every day, it's probably not too far off. It's not too far off me, that's for sure. But, however, we know that as people have... we know, though, that the foundation of the world's economy really rests on this, doesn't it? Exactly the opposite to what God has told us to do. Do not covet. But really, the foundation of the world's economy is covetousness, when you think about it, making us all think that we need something we actually don't. Now, whether that's a nicer house, a more profitable investment, a new car, a better toothbrush, more money, or an updated device, the job of marketers is to make you feel that what you have just isn't good enough. Now, the evidence of that is in the graph that we saw before. No one really needs 7 devices per person. But that's what we're being told that we need. And we're sort of just getting sucked into this sort of stuff and going, yeah, okay, maybe I do need 9 devices now. Who knows? But the evidence is in what we just saw. Now, in the commandments God gave to Moses, which is this: do not covet, are such simple words and they are so relevant to today. But why did God say this? Why does God say, don't covet? In the Bible, God describes an idol as anything that replaces his influence in your life. In Colossians it says, covetousness is idolatry. In Corinthians, flee from that idolatry. And in 1 John, keep yourselves well away from idols. So why shouldn't we covet? Because God knows that it can be such an insatiable desire for all of us to pursue after those things, where it's something that we can just become so obsessed with to the point where it can actually replace him in our life. That's why he says it. Now, the thing marketers target the most, because they know it's the most effective, is your phone. Why? Because you have it with you everywhere you go. Just think about your life, how often you don't have it with you. Because for most people, it's the first thing that they see in the morning, use on the train, have at lunch, use on the toilet, and the last thing before they go to bed. Now, I know I've been in that rhythm before, for many years. But God says, flee from that kind of thing. Flee from things that take away time from him and will fill your head with distractions. And I don't know about you, but I feel like everyone's distracted these days. Everyone is distracted. I don't feel like I can have a conversation with one person, let alone a group of people, where a message, alert, or phone call doesn't interrupt that conversation. Which is not surprising, because a study of over 7,500 people found that 79% of smartphone owners aged between 18 and 44 keep their phones on them for all but 2 hours of their day. Now, when it says it keeps their phones on them, it actually means within a 2 metre proximity. So within 2 metres, your phone, 79% of us who are in that age group, 79% of us have our phones within 2 metres of us for 22 hours of the day. 22 hours of the day. Now, the instinctive thing is to put up a barrier and say, well, I'm not part of that 79%. You know, I'm not someone who takes fake photos and puts them online. You know, I'm not someone who lets my kids get away with using devices more than they should. But the sooner we start to, put ourselves in those categories and in those groups, which are all majority held by society, they're not minority groups, they're majority held, the sooner we can start making changes in our life. The sooner we can start actually making changes. Now, another thing that you might have realised happening recently is the use of smart devices while watching TV or doing other digital activities. Now, the Deloitte Media Consumption Survey in 2018 found this. In Australia, multitasking in front of the TV is ubiquitous. This year, and last year, 91% of respondents multitasked while watching TV. 96% of millennials do this. I'm sure you've noticed that before. But is it a problem? Is it something we should be worried about? Well, if we read the second quote there, which is slightly smaller, it says multitasking can result in passive consumption, watching, reading, browsing and playing multiple forms of media simultaneously without fully focusing on interacting or engaging with any of them. So, when we multitask like this, we actually take in a very, very shallow level of understanding. Now, a study of multitasking performance conducted at Stanford University, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, compared groups of young people assessed as being either heavy or light multitaskers, and ironically, this is what they reported. The surprising results that heavy media multitaskers perform worse. One of the researchers commented, the shocking discovery of this research is that high multitaskers are lousy at everything that's necessary for multitasking. It's just such an oxymoron, the whole thing. It goes on in another, in another similar study. It says everything in the past 30 years has sped up. It's about reacting quickly, but at a shallow level. Text messages and computer games are all about speed and instant hits, rather than a more profound, detailed way of handling information. The way we're training our brains these days is to not think deeply about anything, which is a real problem when it comes to what God has asked us to do. He says, "This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, that you might observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success." How can we expect to have a really, really deep and meaningful relationship with God and Jesus if the majority of our brain training is to be a shallow thinker? Now, I'm not saying that if we own a smart device, we can't have a relationship with God and Jesus. That's not what I'm saying. But the research is clear that using smart devices the way we are today is making our road to a deep relationship with God and Jesus very difficult. And how much harder for our children? I mean, it might not affect those of us who are older, because before technology really, boomed off, we'd already sort of, figured ourselves out, got a relationship with Jesus and God. It's always a work in progress throughout our life, but we kind of had that foundation. But what about this generation coming through? How can we put things into place to help steer them in the right direction? Another thing you may have noticed is how hard it is to hold a conversation with someone these days. This happens so often, especially with myself and a friend of mine at work. He asks me how my day is, and if I lose his concentration for 3 seconds, he's on his phone texting someone from the other side of the world. And I'm sure we have all experienced something like this many times over. But fobbing is a word that was coined to describe exactly this. When you fob someone off for interacting with someone that's just, somewhere else, but you're neglecting the person that's right in front of you. But we know from those other studies that it's the meaningfulness of the relationship that's right in front of you is the thing that's going to hold you together, not those other relationships that we feel the need to connect with people all the time, and we neglect the people that are right here in front of us. Now, a study conducted in 2015 in the USA examined how over 3,200 individuals used their phone on a day-to-day basis. And they found that 89% said that they themselves used their phones during their most recent time with others. That's 89% of all of us. 89% of us do that. We fob people off. We bring out our phones in the middle of conversations, and for some reason it's become acceptable in society and okay to do that. And not just on a one-on-one, but in group conversations as well. If it's not really something you're interested in, I'll just escape into my phone. Everyone does that these days, and for some reason we've just all accepted it. But it's actually, I find, incredibly rude. So, in 2015, the other thing you might have realised is this: the rise of the selfie. Now, another thing, I love that picture, another thing that you have definitely seen is this. In 2015, the search giant Google used machine learning software, so that's, again, harking back to what we were talking about at the beginning, used machine learning software to add labels to images uploaded to its Google Photos application, and analysed how many of these were selfies. Now, a selfie is defined by someone taking a photo of themselves, just themselves, right? It's not with another person, and it's not, can you take a photo of me? It's, I'm taking a photo of myself with the camera facing me. That's the definition of a selfie. And this is what they found. In 2015, 480 million images are uploaded every day. This is just to Google. And totaled 175 billion in 2015. and 13.7% were selfies. 1 in every 6 photos was a photo of themselves. Now, in 2017, just look at the amount of photos that people are going through. 1.2 billion images uploaded every single day, and that's just to Google. And this graph shows exactly the same thing, but it's not just Google, it's the internet in general. And we can see there the steady increase over the last 5 years of the amount of images people are now taking. And we can see there that 85% of them are taken on smart devices. I think people long ago had a lot more insight into the dangers of technology than we do today. The genius Albert Einstein said this: "I fear the day that technology will surpass our human interaction, the world will have a generation of idiots." And I think, how true. And we know from some of the research we've been looking at, and we'll find out much more in our next study next week, of how this is actually dumbing our minds down as kids and as adults. Adults don't escape either. But God says this: "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man loves the world, God's love is not in this person. For all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, it is of the world." Now, to not love the world is really hard. And I don't think it gets any easier the older that you get. To not love the idea of a better car, of a bigger house, of a better job, of nicer clothes, of a fancier phone, is hard. It's hard not to love the idea of that. But the parable of the sower describes this as deceitfulness of riches. That the promise that those things can somehow give us happiness and meaning is deceitful. A lie. Something that's not true. It's subtle. Just like how when the serpent deceived Eve into thinking something and believing a lie, we also can fall into that same slippery trap. And all of a sudden, the simplicity that we've all found in Jesus may not be that simple anymore. Now, the wise King Solomon, another character in the Bible, who was the richest man on earth in his day, described chasing riches as grasping for the wind. And for us, what makes loving not the world harder to achieve is the world's values constantly present in our pockets, or if not in our pockets, it's within 2 meters of us, 22 hours a day. Now, we've covered a lot this evening, and I don't expect you to remember or retain all of it. But in our 3rd study, I will be giving out a booklet with all the research and the slides so that you can go through it in your own time. But in our next study, we're going to continue answering our questions, which are here, and we're going to be specifically focusing on the most precious thing to us, and that is our children.